the things that I tell people, I get involved in a lot of very complex litigated matters, and I uncover a lot of insurance fraud. In fact, in the millions annually. And people, and one of the things that I do, because I say no more than anybody in this space. I've probably turned away about 80% of the opportunities that I have on, to do consulting for defense attorneys. But so I can cherry pick and I can control how much time I have, and I put a lot of time in. But I go down rabbit holes. I tell people that I feel like Don Quixote in a John Grisham novel. John Grisham likes writing about the big bad insurance company, and Don Quixote chasing windmills. So I charge a lot of windmills, and sometimes I don't bill for that time, but I've really hit some huge home runs, and it's things I could not have done when we started in the industry. The aerial imagery, even the street view imagery, is something that I use to that find a lot of insurance fraud.
When I founded eClaim in 1999, I told somebody this story the other day. They're like, what was that moment that led you to know, hey, I need to go out and start a business? And it's actually two specific incidents or events. And one was, I was going around. I was national director of claims at Worley. One of my core job in expanding the company was to open up satellite offices, which we opened 8 offices in about 3 years, one of which was in Fort Worth. There was a hailstorm in Plano, and the rule was if it was more than 2,500 claims or estimated to be that, then it went to the NatCat company. If it was less, then it went to the local operation. So that was predicted to be under. So I went out there to bring in some additional personnel and just to oversee the operations. And we were receiving assignments, loss notices over the fax machine. And a primary client at the time was, I'm not going to say the name, but you and I both know this company very well. And they kept calling on a separate line. And said, why are your fax lines busy? And so we have 2 of them, and they're spitting out as fast as they can. But, probably some people listening to this don't know what a fax machine is. And so I can't believe that, in this day and age that we're still doing things this way. And, we had started using email at the time, but people really weren't sending out assignments via email yet. And then right around that time, I went to the PLRB conference in New Orleans. I think you were there. And the keynote opened up about this coming thing called the internet. And the analogy that I remember him making to sort of quantify the impact of the internet was, he said it was going to be greater than the industrial and the agricultural revolutions combined. And I was like, holy crap, that's pretty important. And that began to formulate the idea, I wonder if that internet thing could help insurance claims. And I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, after working on that concept, and I got fired from Worley and founded eClaim in 99, and the rest is history. But it was those 2 events that led to me wanting to strike out and hopefully fundamentally improve the way that claims is being handled, which is still what I wake up to do every day. But that's a long time ago.
Well, you hit a couple of things there. One, Mike Worley, we won't talk, but where is he these days? But you hit something there that I'd forgotten about. And that was this new little thing before everybody started going to emails, completely. They were still wanting to send over assignments via fax. So then we all had e-fax numbers, which was essentially our inbox.
I still have one.
Okay. So we had, TWIA, we were doing some work for TWIA. So, I leave Citizens, after running catastrophe operations there. I don't know that we hit on that. I think there was some intent on doing that. But then I, started Nomad Adjusting, where you and I met, and I get these claims from TWIA. And I had this e-fax. So any fax that came over, it didn't matter. There's no fax machine that could run out of paper. Everything was recorded. Everything was in my inbox. And I get a call from, the folks over at TWIA. We sent over 2,200 claims and, what's going on? Why haven't you contacted them all? And I said, well, actually, and while I'm on the phone with them, I sent over a spreadsheet. I exported from CMS, the claim system that you architected. I send that over to them while I'm on the phone. I said, I just sent you the 890 claims that we received. And he said, well, your fax machine must have run out of paper. I said, we don't have a fax machine. I said it goes straight into the inbox. And of course, it's still my fault. And there's some way that had to be my fault, but it wasn't. And, I said, look, we can't screw up. It's near impossible for us to screw up. The system does everything. So I had everything down to contact dates and everything. And he tells me, well, you need to figure this out. I'm like, all right. So I found out we had the call center in common. I had an outsourced call center, and so did TWIA, the same call center. So I called I think it's Pam Cleveland maybe that ran the call center, and I knew her. And I said, Pam, you have access to TWIA and you have access to Nomad, correct? Yes. I said, well, if you see that it's assigned to us in their system, but it's not in our system, can you set it up? Absolutely, Tim. So she starts setting it up. And then my next call with TWIA was, hey, we don't have any complaints anymore. No complaints about you whatsoever. I told them what we did. Oh, you can't do that. What do you mean we can't do that? Well, you didn't receive it. I'm like, it's showing in your system assigned to us. And, anyway, so we quit doing that. And of course, the complaint started again because he said we couldn't do that. And anyway, it's he was I would consider a dinosaur in, e-fax and the internet.
So you couldn't so you had a solution that was yielding a better result, but you couldn't do it for some bureaucratic reason?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I'll tell you a real quick
story. So you know what I did? I told them, quit sending me work. Why don't you want our claims? I said, because I have to work with you.
Yeah. Yeah, because you make it a pain in the butt. You make it harder to work for you than what it really should be. So I'm not going to name names here, but our first client on Click Claims, what you referred to as CMS, was an outfit over in Florida, and it was I think it was 2004 when they had the Big Four, and he was contracted with a lot of significant carriers over there. So he was getting a very large influx of claims, which he was not used to handling. And so I said, look, I'm going to come over there and help you out in person. So, I packed my truck and I drove to Destin and arrived at his CAD operations. It turned out to be a music studio, which was maybe, I don't know, maybe 400 square feet. And he lived on site in a fifth wheel. And he had this, I don't know if it was a German Shepherd or a Labrador or something. He had a really big dog. It was always in the office, and it was always in the fifth wheel. And I slept on the floor in the fifth wheel that night, and I woke up the next morning with the dog licking my face. That's what I was awakened to. But I remember going over there, and I helped him set up furniture and everything. And when I finally got to watch the operations, we didn't have Click Claims to the point where we could intake claims yet. So they had begun to get assignments as a PDF attached to an email. And I was watching the way that they were processing these, and the tip that they had in the office at the time, the carrier was sending them where they were batched in a PDF file where there might be 20 or 30 separate assignments in a single PDF. And she didn't know how to use a PDF cutter. So for every single assignment, she was taking the entire thing and turning around and sending that to the assigned adjuster, so the adjuster got it, and he would be 1 out of the 25 or 2 out of the 25 or whatever. And I was like, hold on a second. Now you can cut these up into individual assignments. So she started doing it that way, and it was like a miracle. And then the other thing that I remember that was really funny about that is their process and protocol, if you will, for turning in their completed field work was to email the file in. I don't know, maybe they were uploading the document to Click Claims at the time. I don't remember, but their process that they set up in the office was they get the initial field report with all the photos and everything, and they would print the entire file package out, and then they would hand off the paper file to the QA team, who would then do the file reviews with a printed out copy. And of course, 30, 40, 50% of those had something wrong with it. So they had to go back, send it back to the adjuster. They'd they'd fix it, recompile it, send it back up, and they'd print it out again. And sometimes those things would iterate 3 times. And the guy, we were having lunch one day, and he goes, I don't know if I'm going to make any money on this storm. He says, I'm spending $800 to $1,000 a day on ink and paper.
Here's what I'm going to say, Thomas. First of all, this is very painful listening to this. And
it's funny though, right?
But we're fishing. If this claims casting in your introduction, I feel like we should almost be drinking, especially when we have to talk about what was so painful back then. So maybe next time we'll get on, we'll have a few bourbons. But
cherry juice,
juice bourbon. It's comparable. So in Hurricane Ike, I had a client that that I had sat down with and showed him CMS, and he was immediately sold. And in fact, I think he was the first MGA that you onboarded, if I'm correct.
Maybe,
but we won't give names, so we'll leave it like that. So he calls me up, Tim, you have any capacity left? And I said, well, sure. How many claims do you have? He said, well, I have 4,000. Can you handle them? I said, absolutely. So you're going to send them over? No, you need to come pick them up. They're in a box.
Yeah.
So I drove to downtown Houston. I picked up a box of about 4,000, and immediately I went to a printer that could scan them all.
I'm assuming that box had a hard drive in it.
No, that box had a cord forms that a lot of them were hand filled out by agents and faxed in to them.
Yeah, so that's scary.
So I picked these up, and I said, okay, here's it. And I came up with a solution on the way back to the office. I said, okay, I need to go to a printer that can scan all of these and convert to PDFs. And they did exactly that. And then I would split that up into however many. I had everybody back in the office, and there were like 10 of us. I said, okay, you get, we all had 10% interim into the system. And then we got more and more sophisticated. By the time we, move forward about 4 or 5 years, that client was a long-time client. They said that we would have gone out of business, Tim, if it wasn't for you and CMS. In fact, what he said, that I don't know if we were the first person to test your outbound call program, the automated, but we used that. So when we set up those 4,000 claims, you want to talk through the outbound call system and how that worked, because that was from that point forward, you were going to sell them a claims management system. It was just a matter of time. They were so impressed with that.
Yeah. So 2 things about that. One, I remember your experience with going and picking up those actual paper loss notices when I believe it was 2008, you were handling TWIA, and probably a lot of our IA firm clients at the time were handling claims for TWIA. And TWIA was sending out loss notices. They were one of the ones that would send a contiguous PDF that might have 20, 30, 50 losses in a single PDF. So it was the second largest investment that I made in the history of the company. And it was $10,000 to buy the initial license, plus probably another $5,000 to get trained on it, plus the amount of, the human capital on our side that it took to train it. But it was one of the most successful pieces of technology that we ever put into place, and it was called Kofax. And what Kofax was, it was an OCR engine. So, the process that I told you about a little while ago, where you would have to take the PDF and cut it up and send it out as a PDF. Well, what Kofax did, you could run it through there, and it actually extracted the data off of the PDF. The tricky part was not all of the assignments were the same number of pages. So you had to train it to identify a footer that they put at the end of each assignment, and then you said stop this one here and start the next one here, and the system would cut it off and make a new assignment. It would parse out the data, populate it into click claims, take that PDF, cut it apart as a single PDF file, load that into the document manager. And then what we did on top of that was, which is what you were getting to a minute ago with the outbound, which, nobody did it at the time. And to my knowledge, nobody does this today. I think it's one of the most underutilized and most valuable things that we've ever done. But you combine that with TWIA, and I don't remember you remember what the storm was in 2008? I don't know. It was a large Hurricane Ike. So we were killing it. I mean, we were processing, and all of our IA firms were just absolutely killing it. They were getting claims set up faster than anybody else could figure out how to do on the inbound side. And then what we did with the insured response and notifications, the first contact, as we set it up to where there were two conditions. You had to have you had to have a client, a carrier file examiner assigned, and then when the second condition was met, and it could happen in either order, but both had to be met, it had to have a field adjuster assigned. And when those two conditions were met, the system would look in the file and it would auto dial the insured, and it would say the name of our client, and it'd say, we're calling about your insurance claim number, and it would read the claim number. We wanted to let you know that your insured is Tim Molony, and Tim Molony's telephone number is this, and here's what you can expect. We process 25,000 calls an hour. That's what the capacity was. Now, we didn't do that many, but a lot. It could have been several thousand an hour. But we set that thing up, and response times went through the roof. And again, it was one of the most revolutionary things that I remember doing at the time. And, it's still extremely successful today. Now, we've done some new things that I'm not sure if you know about or not, but we've actually converted that process to not just outbound telephone calls, but SMS, email. And now we have a peril specific triage form. So that, if we don't take the loss notice, which we do, and we do a really good job of that. We got a new product coming out next year called I Submit, which is, going to transform the way digital FNOLs happen. Not going to go too far into that, but we're really close on that one. But the data that you get back through that type of digitized first notice of loss, where it's self-service with the insured, where they're putting the information in, then you take that data and you run it through a business rules engine, and it knows how to ask very specific information, which is a continuation of the first notice of loss. In our world, we call it triage. You send that back out to the insured, hopefully via SMS, can go via email, and we even have a way to do it to their cell phone. And then you ask them specific information to go through and document and self-assess the loss, which then comes back, and now you've got optimized data that you can run through another engine. And you talked about earlier, State Farm was early to the race, so to speak, with understanding, hey, I don't need to send an adjuster out on every claim. And I was going to ask you this when you were on it, but back in those days, you still had to look at a physical paper file, a human did, apply some rules and say, this is a fence down, or, there's a couple of shingles off. I don't need to go out on that. I'm going to phone adjust this thing, remote adjust this thing. But, now we actually have the capabilities of having the insured do the work, where they can go and they can take pictures, they can verbally annotate, they can do videos, they can type in, they can answer yes, no questions. They can do FaceTime. You can do in real and move over here and look at this. Show me a big picture of that. Step back, zoom in, zoom out. You can even take control of their phone if it's an app-based thing. Right. So the tools at the disposal right there to handle the claim in the very early part. And you and I have always talked about this. I think we did a co-presentation for this at another PLRB conference one time, but we talked about the first 24, right? Or maybe it was the first 48 hours, but those first 48, 24 hours. I mean, if you screw up the claim in that period and you set the wrong tone early, you don't really have a good chance of getting a good result at the end of the day. So I've always said those first 48 hours are your most critical. Why are we doing things so manually where the adjuster doesn't even get the claim for 5 days sometimes? It's insane.
So this is, I talk about it, that I keep talking about the plaintiff attorneys. When there's credibility is established by acting quickly and appropriately and establishing that rapport with the policyholder, with the homeowner. And when that's not done, you exponentially create the frustration for all parties. The policyholder, if there's a public adjuster, the adjuster, everyone. And it really sets it off. The nice thing about the outbound call program for Hurricane Ida is, we were, before the adjuster even knew they had the claim, that policy was already contacted with the information for the adjuster provided.
So think about this scenario, and I catch a lot of flack because I like to think of myself as open-minded, and even though I sell my services to the independent adjusters and the carriers, I like to listen to every perspective, because I think at the end of the day there's truth to both perspectives. And if we believe the public adjusters and we believe the plaintiff bar that they're also in this for the insured, which I think most of them generally are, as we claim to be, then we should be able to look at both sides objectively and say, hey, is there some truth in what they're saying? And I personally think there is. I think on the litigation side, absolutely, the Florida market has been decimated by the unrealistic and unmanageable and unaffordable level of litigation that they have. But that doesn't close my view to the reality that, these homeowners are willing to go through that. Well, in some cases they are filing lawsuits without the homeowner knowing, but by and large, the homeowners, they're convinced, or they're talked into that, or they're amenable to it. And, if you have your claim and you have your claim number and your adjuster's name and you've hopefully spoken to him, or he's set an appointment date, you're probably going to question whether you need an attorney. But in today's world, where you have, this litigation basically overload, and the technology that's being used to basically put it in your face, whether it's billboards, TV, radio, internet searches, all these means that they're always essentially in your face and saying, hey, if you've been wronged by your insurance company, you want to file a claim. If you haven't been contacted and that storm happened, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and you don't have a claim number, you don't know who your adjuster is, you got to probably say, pick up the phone. Okay, this guy might be able to get me some relief. Yeah, so there's work to be done for sure. And I think, like you said, if the plaintiff bar they're smart and they know how to prey on these vulnerabilities. So there's simple things that can be done in the industry to eliminate the vulnerabilities.
We'll talk about a little bit. One, I like to I have friends on all sides. I've got friends who are plaintiff attorneys and high profile plaintiff attorneys and public adjusters. And that are friends of mine that do a great job at what they do. And when I run into a problem, I want their perspective, because that matters. I need to know that. Some people, you've got people on both sides. Insurance companies are always awful. That's their impression. And then you've got on the other side, public adjusters and plaintiff attorneys are all bad. I've had a lot of experience with, all sorts of messes, and I see it both ways. I appreciate some of the things that the plaintiff bar does. I think in Florida, and vulnerabilities, I think that's, there's some people that the word prey that you used, that's a careful use of the word. I do think that we have an example of that in the Clinty Mosley in Louisiana, where they filed more lawsuits than they could vet. And that gets into a little bit of that search engine optimization, which, that Joe Petrelli and Tom Kawakowski with Forewarn, talk about, where you've got plaintiff attorneys, law firms that are spending $11 million a month, individual law firm, doing search engine optimization so that the traffic from various insurance companies gets routed. To me, that's what the plaintiff attorneys would say to the insurance companies. If the insurance companies did that, that I think would be considered deceptive trade practice. And the fact that the plaintiff attorneys are doing that, and now we have litigation funding as a result, because it used to be that you have ILS, insurance-linked securities, where these hedge funds or in private equity are going to, look, we're going to invest in the insurance industry and make a lot of money. Well, now there's a little bit of a shift where they're investing in the plaintiff law firms, and that is changing things. And it's because they see the return on investment, and that's scary. I don't think that helps the consumer. And
let me ask you a question about that, Tim. In your personal book of knowledge, are you aware of any instances where any of these either entities or individuals are playing both sides, meaning investing in both?
I don't know that. I don't know that at all.
Would you be surprised to know that there are?
I wouldn't be surprised to know that, but I haven't. That's not.
Yeah.
In my. I'm interested now that you've said it. Are you aware of those entities? Yeah, that is. So you're making money on both sides. Yeah.
I mean, you think about it. It's a fundamental rule of investing is, you mitigate yourself by playing the upside and the downside. It's like,
you're shorting by investing in both sides. You're shorting both sides. So the one thing, the fact that you say that is interesting, because if you're familiar with reinsurance around the world, 47 to 50% of reinsurance dollars are for the U.S.
Or they're what? From the U.S.?
For the U.S. For they're reinsuring risks, U.S.-based risk. So that tells you how big the U.S. market is in comparison to the rest of the world, almost 50%. When you look at the cost of reinsurance, the U.S. is more expensive than the rest of the world. And then when you get to Florida, which is more expensive than anywhere in the U.S., there is no incentive for the reinsurers to play in the Florida market. And, there's a reason why it's so expensive. They try to price themselves out of the market because they're not making a return on their investment in that market. This is something conceptually that's difficult for consumers. Plaintiff bar does not want insurance companies. They're suggesting that it's evil and bad for insurance companies to make a profit. I mean, we see it all the time. And these are for-profit entities unless they're in a residual market insurer. And to think about it, when you look around the whole entire world and then you narrow it down to the state of Florida, it's a mess. I will say that there's some problems with these Florida takeout carriers, and I have anecdotal experience with this, where I have written all of the documents required for some of the Florida carriers to get their certificate of authority to conduct business. And as I'm going through, they're asking for the underwriting plan, they're asking for the claims guideline, catastrophe operation plans, anti-fraud SIU, all which I wrote and provided.
This is the OIR that is asking for this, right?
Well, when you have a startup insurance company, in order to get your certificate of authority to conduct business, you've got to provide them enough documentation that they can review and say, okay, you know what you're doing. Well, in my experience, and we're going back to 2014, 2015, when I'm doing this for a group of investors, I told them in August of 2014, before they got their COA, I said, look, if you're planning on doing anything other than takeout business, you need to start working on your rating engine. They ended up buying a carrier that had licenses in 14 states. And said, well, you need to figure out your rating engine because, you don't need to wait till you get your COA. So, I had, I'm telling them this, August, September, October, November, woohoo, we got our COA. And I'm like, okay, how's your rating engine coming? Crickets.
What's a rating engine?
Yeah, December, January, And, they're like, oh, we're going to be up and running in all of these states. And, it took them from February, where they expected to be live in Louisiana, until November of that year, later November. So we have 2014, they get their COA November, and they still didn't listen to me. And then they're all pissy because they didn't listen to me. And well, how we need to get up and running? Well, you're not going to get up and running because you don't even have any way to provide rates to the Department of Insurance, and then these policyholders are the agents. So we got all the way to November. And by this point, I knew they were going out. The other thing I cautioned them is don't go cheap on systems. They did not go with you.
Yeah.
And I knew they were going to fail. I mean, I ended up, in exchange for doing all of the regulatory documents, I said, okay, we'll get the TPA from you, which we did get. And it was horrible because we were working in a system. I was used to working in click claims, which was easy. And they had a system that I'd have been better off working in Excel spreadsheet. It was terrific.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you this. You were heavily involved, if not solely involved, in creating the documentation that was submitted to see if the certificate was going to be issued, or to see if they could pass regulation specifically in the state of Florida. How much knowledge do you have from the other side, meaning on the regulatory side? Did you ever experience, or did you have any insight into what the benchmarks were? And did anybody actually get rejected, or did you just have to go through the process of submitting something under each of these 17 categories? Or do you feel like there was a prudent exercise of diligence and knowledge and skill that was applied on their side to actually read these plans and say pass, fail, or yes, you have this, but you need this? Because there's one thing to write these and it passes with flying colors because you know what you're doing. It's something else to turn it over to a body who really doesn't understand what they're looking at, but it checks the boxes because you put some blurb under each of those. And that's why I really wonder, because I personally feel like in Louisiana, and I don't know about Florida, but if you got $35 million to come into the market, check. We're going to do everything we can to get you in here and create a competitive environment, because that's going to lower premiums, but you don't have a clue what you're doing. You don't have a plan, much less a CAT plan. You don't know how to handle daily claims. You're oversaturated in a particular risk zone. You haven't done underwriting inspections. You don't know how to rate these things. You take them all out. You just want the premium dollars. You want to get in business. And then when the claims happen, we got to deal with these pesky little things called claims. I've never been a fan of Jim Donelon. I'll say it right here in public for the first time. I'll tell you a quick story. Pre-Katrina, I made a sales call to their primary vendor who was responsible for handling Louisiana citizens claims. And I told him all about our system, and I asked what he was using. He says, Thomas, we don't need any of that. And I said, well, tell me what you're doing. He goes, we got everything on a Rolodex. I was like, see you later. There was no talking to this guy. He was so ignorant about the shit that was potentially going to hit the fan that
he went to
hit the fan soon after.
Watch your language.
The person I'm talking about, or the person listening?
No, Jim Donelon.
Or
Jim Donelon also went to Jesuit. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, too bad.
No, I'm okay. I had to get that in there for the New Orleans audience.
Well, I'm disappointed now. I'm not sure that I'm going to say what I was about to say about him, because he's I guess a notch higher now that I know that.
Well, I got to tell you that here's the problem with.
In my opinion, I hate to get into politics, but we got too many politicians that are trying to, govern something that they have no experience about. And I have a paper that I'm writing right now called Ask Your Adjuster. If you want to fix the insurance problems, don't talk to the politicians. You can talk to the insurance carriers, but you really need to go the downstream of the people that are in the trenches that understand what's happening. And a guy like me, who haven't adjusted a claim in 20 years, but we average hundreds of thousands of claims every year. So I'm privy to a lot of pass through and a very large volume of claims, most of which is, in the Gulf Coast area generated by storms, 80%. And I get to see the good, the bad, the ugly. So I can run data analytics and tell you what the average cycle time is. I can tell you how fast people are getting contacted and inspections being made on a mass level. And it's very disappointing. And I blame a lot of that, frankly, on the authorities that allow these companies to come in when, in my opinion, the big threshold is, do you have the money? And if they have the money, we're going to do everything we can to get you in. And maybe you have a claim handling plan, maybe you don't. But you're right, they don't spend the money on systems.
I'm going to say I'd have, so over the past 5 years, my time at BSC, what's been nice is I haven't had a claims inventory. I haven't been running a company. So I've had a lot of time to learn a lot of different things: the underwriting, the risk management, the loss control, reinsurance. And I think I've gained some insight. So where I used to believe that claims had a lot of the answers, I feel like my vision is a little bit broader than it used to be. And some of the issues, the catastrophe problem is something that we need to figure out a solution for. Right now, the problem is, as you and I know, there's a baseline of claims, and insurance companies historically staff for that baseline. They don't want to staff
Right.
over that because they're paying people to sit around and do nothing.
Right.
And the one problem, or the one thing that I think the insurance industry needs to do is figure out how to have enough, money set aside in a slow year. The catastrophe adjusters make nothing, which means the industry. So after 2023, with no hurricane, the insurance adjusting world is contracting a little bit, and every year that's a slow cat year, it contracts. So the problem is, how do we get enough money in the hands of these individuals that want to be independent adjusters without them having to go and look somewhere else for jobs? That's a huge problem. And
Yeah.
I think so.
The first true cat that I was dispatched to, that I was telling you about a little while ago, that flood in 1991. I showed up at that cat site, and there was a guy that showed up that drove in from Texas. And I remember overhearing him say that he had to stop at a pawn shop on the way, and he pawned his wedding ring so that he could afford the gas to get there. And I thought, I knew that wasn't my life, and it wasn't my profession, and it was only a temporary thing. But man, I felt sorry for that guy. And I was like, why is this industry not supporting the people? And that was 30 years ago, and it's gotten worse. Cost of living has gone way up. I look at fee schedules. I mean, we have an accounting system built into click claims. So I personally, and I think this is a very odd thing, and you'll probably never hear this from anybody else, but I tend to look at, nuanced stuff that other people aren't looking at. And one of the biggest challenges that the IA firms have is their fee schedules, and just getting the adjusters paid the right amount of money. And I'm not talking about the fairness, the amount that they're paying. I'm talking about the cockamamie ways that the carriers think they're outsmarting the next guy by saying, okay, well, we're going to, pay you 57 3/4 of a penny per mile, but the first 6 miles are free. Unless you go through a toll. And then if you got 25 photos, then, we'll pay you for those miles. Or it's really silly, goofy stuff. And at the end of the day, every one of those, I call them stupid fee schedules, has to be embedded into a system. That process alone right there, nobody's thinking about it. Nobody's talking about it. It's extremely complex, and it's extremely It causes latency in the entire process. It's inefficient. And at the end of the day, nobody's winning or losing over a couple of pennies. I mean, we need to standardize the way that we're creating fee schedules. The other problem is in Florida, as soon as the cat hits, Florida Citizen jacks up their rate by what, 15, 20, 30% if they have to, especially if there's been an event recently in another state that's got adjusters working over there. They're going to jack their fee schedules up just to get people to come over, which means that all of a sudden the rest of the carriers in the state of Florida, if they want to have any human capital, they've got to meet that. So that's an easy area where administratively or the government can look at this and say, if you're not going to tell me how much we can charge, you can at least govern the way that we set these fee schedules up. And you wouldn't believe the way that the issues that we deal with IA firms that come to me and say, hey, can you make the system do this because this carrier doesn't want to pay for this? And there's so many contingencies, you can't write a business rules engine smart enough to figure out how to pay the frickin' adjuster. And it's just stupid. And it's little stuff like that that really bother me about the way that we do this. And I'm sitting back and going, how is that making your insured more happy? And it's not.
You are living in the residential personal lines right now, and you and I have worked on some things that make that stuff look simple. Where when we get into the quota share space on the commercial, you have 40 participants. And Tom, I need your system to be able to send out 40 invoices because I have 40 participants, 40 carriers, 40 underwriters that I need to bill their percentage. And, so funny, you take what you're talking about right now and you multiply it by these 40 participants or even 10 participants on a lot of these quota share risks but we have a special contract with this one. So we're going to cut the rate here. We're going to use our rack rates over here, which is our published rate. Oh, wait a second. This one we're on layer 1, we're at this, but when it gets up to layer 2 of this risk, then, we're going to be, anyway, the math is like this, like quantum physics. It's fun. It's what we talk about, cognitive strain, where you and I get on these calls and we have these discussions and we get smarter people like my wife on the call that said, that all of a sudden, it's the fun part is we're given instead of the 5-piece puzzle that we used to get, or the 10-piece or the 100-piece, we're now getting that 1,000-piece puzzle, which, it's fun working on. It's fun working through that problem solving and coming up with the solution, which that's, if there's one thing that I've absolutely enjoyed about our relationship is how we're able to do these 1,000, 2,000, 5,000-piece puzzles together and come up with solutions on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that I wish that our industry would get better at, and it's super, super simple. And I think like this because of a class that I took at LSU, and granted, this is going back into the 80s, but if you think back at the time, Toyota was dominating the auto market, and we learned about the reason why they were so successful. And it's because they had a very different approach to the way that they partnered with all the stakeholders in the assembly process. And they intimately knew the capacity of every partner in the life cycle so they could precisely time how everything worked. And if one of the partner entities had a problem, they didn't shut them off. They didn't penalize them. They helped them get through that problem. And I feel like in the insurance industry in the US, it's almost the opposite thing. It's like, you know what, we're going to take these claims in and we're going to shove them off to this IA firm. Who gives a rat what, the data looks like? It's up to them to go get it, fix it, clean it up, annotate it, and it's all pushed to the adjuster, yet they expect the adjuster to have these fantastic cycle times. And it's like, take responsibility for the quality of your data, make sure that they get it timely, and help that entity out and find out, what is it about your rules as a carrier that's making it difficult for me to work for you? And I've heard a lot of adjusters talk about which carriers they want to work for and which ones they won't, because they make it hard to do a good job of handling claims. And I don't think that the carriers look at it like that, and they don't focus on, how do I get the results that I want through helping the people that I rely upon to do this?